So it looks like we finally have a datasheet for one of the big guns of the guard. Seems like the Battle Cannon Russ has a way to get full innate rerolls, provided you focus on blasting your foes off the objectives. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Imperial Guard once more, and in this video I thought I'd focus on the trusty Leman Russ battle tank, one of the datasheets I was a little bit disappointed not to see in that stream that they did the other day. But fortunately they chose to follow it up with an individual datasheet drop as the tournament unfolded, so we get to see the new stats for the mainline battle tank of the Guard. Let's talk briefly about the Russ and the model, then go through these rules and talk about how it might play in game. Model-wise, the Leman Russ battle tank is a bit of a classic, very much epitomising 40k armour with a frankly enormous gun for the chassis, some classic World War I style sponsons, and all heavy armour, big power and no subtlety, the fearsome workhorse beast of the Guard. Even the standard one mounts the fearsome tried and tested battle cannon, but many variants exist, from the tank hunting Vanquisher to the rare and exotic Executioner plasma tank. Direct from Games Workshop, the miniature's £40, €55 or $65, maybe a little bit better than at least some vehicles out there in 40k. I guess it's maybe a recent release thing, but things like the Space Marine Impulsor cost a fair bit more than this guy, despite being a transport as opposed to a battle tank. In 9th edition, Games Workshop did us a small mercy of consolidating the kits. Previously we had the Demolisher and the main battle tank as separate models, but now we've got all the turret options in one box, so if you feel like it, you can really magnetise big, and you can field a different Leman Russ tank each game that you play. I do recommend that if you've got enough time and effort to magnetise them. I've had just so much value out of my fully magnetised Russes. Perhaps my favourite bit is putting the magnet on the inside of the track housing, so you can just take the sponsons on and off, and the tank look fine with either of them off or on. As miniature quality goes, I think it shows its age a little bit compared with some of the other kits of 40k, maybe a bit more of a simplistic one on a technical level for Games Workshop plastics, but still I feel like you're never really going to beat a trusty icon of the Guard. Very much goes in with their big 20th century warfare aesthetic. If you were looking to pick up Russes for the new edition, Element Games sells them in the UK at £34, so a 15% discount there. Noble Knight Games has them in the USA, and Gap Games in Australia. All of those links support the channel, and I'll link them down in the video description. Can also just be a way of saving a bit of money compared with buying direct. On to the exciting bit though, and here we have the Leman Russ rules profile for 10th edition. Interestingly, it seems that the datasheet that we have is just the Battle Cannon Russ at this point. It kind of begs the question as to whether or not each individual Leman Russ is going to get its own datasheet in 10th, or whether or not they're going to print some sort of consolidated armory type card. I believe they're doing that for the Chaos Space Marines, which I guess might list the other turret variants. If they confirm that anywhere on the stream, feel free to let me know. I'll update the pinned comment below. For basic rules though, we're also missing its points value, so we're still not going to be weighing it up against the other guard choices yet, but we can still get a very good idea as to how it's going to play. For its basic rules, it's got a 10-inch movement. There's still no grinding advance on this now, so it still means that you can move 10 inches and not compromise on the firepower, though I guess you can stay stationary for born soldiers in the Combined Regiment. The tank's objective control 3, so has a little bit of objective threats, but realistically won't hold points against squads. Its leadership 7, which is a touch low and definitely has the possibility of battle shock, and in the keyword section it has both the squadron and the smoke keywords, and isn't battle line. I'm pretty sure that squadron will be the keyword for targeting orders onto this thing, plus it also interacts with one of the stratagems as we'll get onto. It does make me wonder though whether we're going to be able to run these in squadrons or not and break them up as per now, or whether you might just be limited to 3 Leman Russes and then have to take some of the other variants. Finally, it does have the smoke keyword as well, pretty handy as that's a really good stratagem, particularly for a durability increase on a 2+ save tank. Talking of toughness, I'd say that the standard Leman Russ hasn't done too badly with the transition from 9th to 10th. It's got a base toughness of 11, a 2+ save, it's kept its 13 wounds, which means that anything with even damage will typically do a bit of overkill to it. A lot of things wind up doing 12 damage before they do 13. And when it's down to 4 wounds or less, it'll degrade, so -1 to hit. I guess the biggest change is the toughness from 8 to 11. I'd say that does feel roughly equivalent with the new 10th edition rules. That seems to be the trend with quite a lot of vehicles. It seems that it's going to be a bit more resilient to medium strength fire. Things like overcharged plasma will now wound it on a 5+, and so will most melter weapons, interestingly. It does seem to have actually got slightly less durable against las cannons this edition though. Their strength 12, so still wounded on a 3+, unlike the toughness 12 big armour, and they've gone up to damage d6+1, so take a pretty massive chunk out of it now. Overall, these are the shots that you'll need to kill a Russ: 117 heavy bolter hits, 29 overcharged plasma, around about 8 or 9 melter shots within melter range, or around about 6 or 7 las cannon hits. Pretty much as you'd expect. The heavy bolters have also dropped in efficiency significantly against this guy. Wounding it on 6s isn't nice. Finally, the degrading, I'd say, is still going to be felt pretty hard when it happens. Going down to hitting on 5s from 4s is pretty unpleasant, and now the main battle cannon hits on a 4 plus, not a 3 plus, that's going to be felt a tiny bit more when it happens. At least you don't drop to hitting on 5s when you're half bracketed now, and you never go down to hitting on 6s. If anything, I feel like the degrading rules are actually a little bit better than the rush than they were before, so maybe a little bit more threat when it's on its last legs. That definitely feels like the most interesting part of the datasheet when I first saw it was the battle cannon. This is the gun profile that they showcased on Warhammer Community, and I must admit from initial reactions to the gun I did feel like it looked underwhelming on its raw stats. Previously they were hitting on 3 plus at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 3, wounding almost everything on a 4 plus or better, better AP and better hit rolls, and it really does feel like the 10th edition battle cannon has taken a number of nerfs to its actual core rules. I'd say going from strength 8 up to strength 10 could be argued to be a downgrade actually, despite going up. Previously, if say you'd taken aim at another Leman Russ, you would have wounded it on a 4 plus, now it's a 5. The same goes for anything else that was previously toughness 8 and goes to toughness 11 or 12. AP minus 1 is a big blow in dealing with more armoured targets. It's dropped in damage output quite a lot against 2 plus saves there. It no longer hits on a 3 plus, so that means it's a lot more vulnerable to modifiers. It's dropped in range down to 48 inches, still going to be in range for most of the board, but not all of it now. And to cap it all, Born Soldiers has got a bit worse as well. You only auto wound if you're stationary, but not if you've moved. I guess perhaps the only real positive in my point of view on the core rules is that it gained the new blast keyword, which I think will be a lot more meaningful for it than the old one. If you're taking aim at a squad of 5 or 10 or more, you're going to be getting a few extra shots there. When we talked about the battle cannon when they teased it, I did guess that they might well have some sort of rule to give it a damage boost on its datasheet, and it seems that they have done that. I must admit it feels like a bit of a weird one though, certainly looks like a strong rule, but maybe not the way that I would have wanted to go with the Russ if I'd been designing it. First up, it looks like all the Russ weapons just reroll a hit roll of 1 innately against everything for some reason. I do find units with that rule just a little bit weird when they're trying to tone down rerolls a little. I guess maybe it's to give them a bit more fine control of the damage buff, and not just make the difference between having the rule and not having the rule absolutely enormous. That will be a small efficiency increase, basically plus 17% damage compared with not having it, so all well and good. In reality though, the bit that you really want is reroll all hits against enemies that are on an objective marker that they control. That's a pretty hilariously massive boost. Reroll all those hit rolls to help mitigate that 4 plus ballistic skill. You should be hitting 3/4 of the time. This is effectively a 50% damage boost compared with not having that rule at all. Basically looks like the Rosses are going to specialise in destroying enemy units that are taking points. Might be enemy heavy stuff if they put that there, might just be light infantry. It is a bit in your opponent's control, I guess, but you can pretty much guarantee that opponents will be putting units on objectives as they kind of need to win the game. Should mean that the rush shouldn't be too far short of targets when it's using this rule, and if you've got a lot of them it could really play mind games with your opponent as to what they put on the objective and what they choose not to. If you take the one rule in the context of the other, it means that you get to reroll hit rolls of 1 normally, but go up to full hit rerolls if you shoot something on an objective, and the relative damage increase of those two is a plus 29%. Your Russes basically get around about 30% better when shooting things on objectives compared with shooting other stuff. It's a very nice rule to have, though I must admit I do find it pretty weird to be honest. Just seems like a slightly odd rule to have on your main battle tank that should probably be giving and trading blows with the enemy heavy hitters regardless, and somehow the main battle tank gets massively more efficient if the opponent's unit just happens to be standing next to a shiny relic or something, as opposed to engaging them out in the field. Just feels all a little bit arbitrary and more reliant on this rule for damage than just its raw weapon stats, but don't get me wrong, it looks like a fantastically useful thing to have in game, and given the battle cannon profile, I feel like it probably did need a bit of a lift, at least from the raw stats that they'd previewed. For working out the actual damage output of the Russ, if we just focus on the battle cannon alone and ignore the extra small arms like las cannons, heavy bolters, and stubbers and things, here's the rough amount of damage that you might expect when you're targeting a unit that's not on an objective and a unit that is. On average, if you're not on an objective, you kill around about 3 or 4 termagants, that's assuming a bit of blast going on there. Usually kill around 1 or 2 Space Marine intercessors, around about 1 dead Terminator, 4 wounds to a Rhino, though you're unlikely to even make 1 failed save against something like a Land Raider that you're wounding on 5s and has a 3 plus save with its good armour. Then if you take aim at something on an objective, that goes up by 29%, going up to like 4 or 5 termagants, more like 2 dead Space Marines a bit more consistently, and you've got about a coin flip chance of making a Land Raider fail a save. This is just for the raw damage output alone, so no things like orders or born soldiers or anything, though I thought just for interest I'd include the static shooting against a Land Raider on an objective. The full hit rerolls is a pretty interesting interaction with the lethal hits, as it means that you can just reroll everything that isn't a 6 and just fish for some auto wounds. Most of the time that's going to equate to around about one failed save on a land raider or an objective, so while it improves things quite a bit, it still isn't absolutely outstanding. I guess one of the other turret variants is going to be a lot better against that kind of thing. Certainly looking forward to breaking down the other turret variants when we get them. Will be fun to redo the math for the best guard turrets in 10th edition. Otherwise, beyond the main big gun, we've got all the secondary weapons as well. They'll also get the damage boost from the armoured spearheads, so re-rolling hits or re-rolling hit rolls of 1. The sponsons have shifted about a little bit, and I guess again we still won't know how good they are without the points costs for these. The plasma cannon is broadly kept fairly similar, barring losing a touch of AP on the non-overcharged variant, but I feel like the addition of the blast keyword to those things is going to be absolutely savage against hordes. If you get to target a massed up unit of 15 or 20 of these, you're going to be getting a crazy amount of extra hits for that profile. Flamers seem solid for aggressive Russes, particularly with the new Overwatch. Heavy bolters are maybe a little bit weedier into quite a lot of targets in 10th with the stretched toughness chart, though I guess they have picked up sustained hits to make them a bit more effective against infantry. And multi-melters remain very punchy and will deal some nasty damage to most things, but are a lot more close range now at 18 inches. It's going to be very points dependent on which one of those winds up being good, or even if it's worth taking sponsons to start with. Otherwise, the new las cannon profile on the whole looks pretty punchy, seems very solidly better than the heavy bolter if they do remain the same cost. And now interestingly for the top guns, the Stubber is basically a flat improvement on the heavy bolter. 36 inches, 3 shots and then rapid fire for 3 more, both better range and more shots than the Storm Bolter, so I'd guess based on that it might well cost a few more points. You can certainly still cover guard Rosses in a ton of guns if you want to. Will be interesting to see what the better loadouts shake out to be. Finally, it's definitely not what they're known for, but running over things with tanks in 10th edition looks like it's a thing. 6 attacks hitting on a 4 plus at strength 7 is better than it is currently, and it does mean that you might roadkill a light infantry if you need to wade into combat. Tank shot looks like a solid option though if you do need to squash something tanky. With 7 attacks to roll those 5 pluses on, you'd average around about 3 mortal wounds against anything toughness 6 or less. Again, that could be a really interesting option for just a little bit of extra damage if say you needed to flatten an enemy character or something. We don't have the full rules for the Guard Codex yet, and a few other datasheets are going to be pretty interesting, but a few things that we do know look solid. Newborn Soldiers is definitely less useful than the old one, given that you can't use it after moving. You get lethal hits when you're static, which will be great on the guns, but generally in Warhammer 40k movement is important. You need it to get line of sight of things and get to objectives. If the opponent charges out though and puts lots of units in good line of sight, sitting and shooting could give you a bit more damage. It seems particularly brutal as well if your opponent's controlling objectives. You could sit and fish for lethals if you're static, reroll every single hit that isn't a 6 against tough targets. That'd stack a pretty unpleasant amount of auto wounds on things like knights or other tough vehicles or monsters. Otherwise, we've got the nice table of orders. I'd say more of them seem to be written with infantry in mind more so than tanks. Realistically, for the Leman Russ, there's going to be 2 that's going to be most important. Take aim for a +1 to hit on those guns, hitting on a 3+ if you've got a friendly Lord Solar or tank commander about. Definitely a big boost in efficiency, but maybe not quite as much as you might expect for a +1 to hit. It won't either help you with the lethal hits, and if you do already have the full hit rerolls on objectives, you still are going to be hitting with the majority of hits anyway. The percentage increase isn't as good as it might have been otherwise. Still though, definitely no bad thing to have. The other one that I think will be used quite a bit is Move 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 for an extra 3-inch movement. It's not quite as big a deal as the big D6 Advance plus 2 inches that you have now. That'd be 5 or 6 inches on average, but still occasionally that's going to be what you need to either get line of sight to get onto terrain so you can see through it or get to an objective, so in the right situation it's still going to be big. Otherwise, we've got a fair few of the guard stratagems plus all the core ones. I feel like out of any of the ones that we've seen previewed so far, I honestly think that Smoke might have one of the most high values. Getting cover on a 2+ save unit should give you a better save against a lot of anti-tank weapons. You'd be saving against las cannons on 4s, and you also even trigger a -1 to hit as well at the same time. This seems great on a Russ that your opponent's likely to focus. Tank shot could splat out some mortal wounds, 3 on average as we mentioned, though a bit swingy. And Overwatch is going to be a massive deal just in 10th edition in general. Russes certainly don't seem like a bad target for it though. A whole bunch of hits from some scary weapon profiles hitting on 6s. And if you can target something that's just moved into range of an objective, then you basically get to re-roll everything, potentially even get lethal hits if you're stationary. It is actually genuinely quite scary damage output for the tank. It hit with almost a third of your shots, and all of those things that did hit would be auto wounding if you target a unit on an objective. You do need to be in 24 inches though. Otherwise, for the combined regiment, there's a couple that seem useful, but maybe not super exciting. There's a 2 command point one that's -1 damage at range. That does seem inferior to smoke for me for the vast majority of purposes. It will be better than smoke if you're being shot with damage 2 weapons, but it does cost more CP. Maybe the most interesting thing though is that it doesn't seem to have any minimum of 1 now, so if you got shot by a bunch of small arms and that was somehow relevant, it sounds like this could actually flat out negate their fire. That could be kind of funny, though I suppose the damage 1 weapons, I think, for the most part, aren't actually going to be the biggest thing that's threatening you. Otherwise, Guard have Fields of Fire to be able to focus down one target with an extra pip of AP. That's just going to be relevant for Gunline Guard in general, and it isn't a bad buff against a unit that's really big and tanky and in the middle of the board, perhaps. I certainly feel like the Battle Cannon and things like Heavy Bolters would really enjoy that extra AP. AP -1 is perhaps my least favourite thing about it. Overall, I feel like it's a solid enough datasheet with the right points cost, and those 4 rerolls to hit against objective units is brutal. Just for other random things in 10th edition, you can fire in and out of combat with everything -1 to hit now, basically turret weapon for everything, though your main turret hits on a 4. Could be nice for sponsons, and maybe further means that you don't need to screen these guys quite as hard as you used to. You could utilise strategic reserve for them. Often I feel if you're going very big on the armour, then just having one come in with good lines of sight turn 2 can be quite nice. Hopefully we'll see some other datasheets in the near future, things like engine seers and tank commanders, both of which should buff the Leman Russ in their own ways. And I'd kind of hope that when we do eventually get the Guard Codex, there'll be a tank-focused regiment, maybe a detachment that goes for a Talon-style armor list perhaps. That would be really cool to see with a bunch of Russes zipping around the table swift as the wind. Overall though, I do quite like the damage boost, as I said. Definitely makes me feel a bit happier about the slightly toned down battle cannon profile for the most part, and I think more than anything I'm looking forward to seeing the other guns. I noticed the Baneblade was sporting a very intriguing demolisher cannon with d6 plus 3 shots, strength 14, AP 3 and damage d6. That one looks brutal and far more general purpose than the battle cannon. I guess if they are different datasheets though, they might not necessarily get the full rerolls to hit against objective units. It might have its own different special rule for cracking fortifications or something. I can't help but think with other big threats like the Demolisher and the Executioner out there, I feel like one of the other variants might well wind up being more widely used than the mainline battle cannon. If you're not wounding all your vehicles on a 4+, at least having extra AP might seem good. Really looking forward to how it all shakes out though, and I'll most certainly aim to do a breakdown of the turret math between the different variants when we do find them out. In any case, let me know what you make of the new Guard Rust stats then. Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll certainly look forward to talking more Guard in future videos. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep any more rules reviews coming. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics has a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.